Welcome our distinguished guest.
Dear Anna Fatiga, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's also a pleasure to welcome you all to this joint meeting of our Committee on Foreign Affairs, the Subcommittee on Security and Defence, and also the Delegation for Relations with NATO. First of all, General Secretary Stoltenberg, it's a huge honour, huge pleasure for us to welcome you to our meeting today. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for coming. Thanks for exchanging views with the member of the three committees. You are a regular guest in our committees, which demonstrates the strength of our shared commitment to closer EU-NATO relations in these challenging times. I think despite some political differences we of course have in this European Parliament, we all agree that the EU and NATO need to work together even more intensively in the future. Both organisations share the large majority of member states, the same threats and challenges. Therefore, it is imperative that we identify synergies and ways to increase the complementarity between the European Union and NATO. We've discussed many challenging items in the last few weeks in our committee, and we came to the conclusion that the overall international political landscape has changed dramatically in the last months. Unfortunately, we have to recognise that instability crises, conflicts have all deepened in the last year. We often speak of an arc of instability in the EU neighbourhood, and I'm afraid we have to say that it only got worse. Developments in the Western Balkans are seriously worrying. No solution is in sight for the war in Syria, with all the implications for the peace and stability of the whole Middle East. ISIS might be losing ground and popularity in the region, but we might still face the consequences of this dreadful terrorist ideology here in Europe. The EU relations with Turkey, a NATO member, are going through a critical phase. And if we look to the Far East, signals from North Korea are also deeply worrying. Ladies and gentlemen, a final remark. The EP has always been a staunch supporter of EU-NATO cooperation, and we are convinced that all the challenges we are facing should deepen our cooperation. We should be very interested in getting your views, Mr. General Secretary, on the recent international developments and on how we can reflect onto further EU-NATO cooperation. I would therefore now like to give the floor to our General Secretary, and then afterwards we have time for an exchange of views. Once again, huge honour and pleasure that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you, David and Anna, for your hospitality and for inviting me once again to address these committees. I have done it before, and actually last time I did it was just before the Warsaw summit of NATO in July last year, and now I'm coming back and I'm addressing you just before, actually only 3 weeks before, NATO leaders, heads of state and government, will meet again in Brussels, this time on the 25th of May. And I'm pleased to be able to tell you that since I met you last time, we have made a lot of progress when it comes to cooperation in NATO and the European Union. First of all, I signed the declaration together with President Juncker and President Tusk in Warsaw in July. And later on, together with High Representative Federica Mogherini, we agreed in December on 42 concrete measures on how to strengthen NATO-EU cooperation. And we are strengthening the NATO-EU cooperation based on the fact that, of course, not all EU members are members of NATO, and not all NATO members are members of the European Union. So we fully respect the autonomy of the decision-making processes in the European Union and in NATO. We respect the differences between the two organisations, but we at the same time understand that we have a lot to gain from working closely together. Because even though not all members are the same, we know that more than 90% of the people living in an EU country, they live in a NATO country. And we share the same security environments. We share the same instability to the south with ISIL, with turmoil, with violence in the wider Middle East region in North Africa, and we also share the same challenges coming from a more assertive Russia. So therefore there are strong reasons for strengthening the EU-NATO cooperation, and that's exactly what we have done with the joint declaration and with the 42 measures we now are implementing. And those 42 measures are about how we can work more closely on cyber defense, on responding to hybrid threats, on operations, on exercises, and in many other ways. And the good thing is that we are really making progress, and High Representative Mogherini will report to the EU Council in June. I will report to the NATO Council in June on the progress we are making, and then after summer we will look into what more we can do to further build and strengthen our cooperation. The good thing is that we are not only implementing concrete measures, but we have also been able to change the culture. So now actually cooperation is the norm, is the normal thing in the relationship between NATO and EU. Before it was more the exception. So I'm really pleased to start by telling you that we are making progress. We have lifted the NATO-EU cooperation to a new level. That was also my message to to Ministers of Defence, the European or the EU Ministers of Defence in Malta when I met them there last week. And I told them that we have very visible, concrete examples of how we are working together in the Mediterranean, just off the coast of Malta. The NATO Maritime Security Operation Sea Guardian provides direct support to the EU Operation Sophia, dealing with the challenges we see in the central Mediterranean. Last week we had 4 NATO ships, 3 NATO Maritime Patrol aircrafts and some other assets helping and supporting the EU Operation Sophia. We also work together in the Aegean Sea with the NATO naval presence in the Aegean Sea, helping to implement the EU-Turkey agreement, stemming the flow of illegal migrants. So this is not only in words but also in deeds that we have been able to really strengthen NATO-EU cooperation, and I look forward to take that agenda forward. Then, as I said, we will have a NATO meeting of heads of state and government on the 25th of May here in Brussels. That will be a short meeting, but it will be a very important meeting, because it will be the first meeting where the new US President comes to Europe, comes to NATO, and it will be also the first meeting with the new French President. So I'm absolutely certain that the NATO meeting on the 25th of May will be a very strong, will send a very strong message about transatlantic unity, transatlantic resolve, just by convening the meeting and having all the 28 leaders together. Actually, it will be 29, because we will also have Montenegro present, because Montenegro is now in the process of becoming the 29th member of the alliance. All parliaments will have ratified that within a question of a few weeks. The 2 main issues that will be addressed at the NATO meeting are both very relevant for EU and for, of course, all EU members, regardless of whether they are a member of NATO or not. Because we are going to address the transatlantic bond, burden sharing, and the fight against terrorism. I will just briefly go through those 2 main issues. I will not go through the whole NATO agenda. I will leave many issues to you to have time to ask me questions afterwards. So I will not cover all issues, but I will briefly then share with you some thoughts on these 2 main issues for the meeting in May. First, on the fight against terrorism. Terrorism is something which is a real threat. We have seen terrorist attacks in our capitals across Europe, in the United States, in EU countries, in NATO countries. And we see that this is attacks on our open, free, democratic societies. And we have to fight back in many different ways. And we need a wide range of measures in the fight against terrorism. It's about political measures, diplomatic measures, economic measures, domestic politics, international politics. And many of the measures are civilian and have nothing to do with NATO and military capabilities. But some of the measures we need in the fight against terrorism are military. And we need also a military element in the fight against terrorism. As we have seen in Afghanistan for many years, but also as we now see in the fight against Daesh or ISIL in countries like Iraq and Syria. And NATO has played and is still playing a key role in that part of the fight against terrorism, which is about the military means. We have played a key role in Afghanistan for many, many years. Our military presence in Afghanistan is our biggest mission ever. And all NATO allies have participated, but also many non-NATO allies have participated because they are partners. They have participated in the rescue support mission and before that the ISAF mission in Afghanistan. And many of the countries that are not member of NATO but member of EU have been in Afghanistan. So this has been a joint struggle, and we still have to be in Afghanistan. We have ended our combat operations in Afghanistan, but we continue to train, assist and advise the Afghan forces to enable them to stabilize their own country, enable them to fight terrorism themselves. And I think that if there is one lesson we have learned, both from Afghanistan, but also in a different way, but at least the same lesson we have learned from Bosnia and Herzegovina and from Kosovo, is that in the long run it's much better if we are able to train local forces to stabilize their own country, to fight terrorism themselves, instead of NATO deploying a big number of combat troops in big combat operations. So building local capacity, training local forces is the key when it comes to NATO's contribution to fighting terrorism. We have to make decisions on our presence in Afghanistan in the coming years. And we have to make decisions on how to step up our efforts to fight terrorism, including when it comes to providing support for the counter-ISIL coalition, the US-led counter-ISIL coalition in Syria and Iraq. NATO provides some support already. We train Iraqi officers, but I think that NATO has an untapped potential for doing much more, not to engage in combat operations, but to engage in something which is actually even more demanding and will take more time, and that is to enable the Iraqis, other countries in the region, to stabilize their own country and to fight terrorism themselves. So we are working with many countries in the region to help them fight terrorism and stabilize the region. The other main issue, and then this is on the agenda for the meeting on the 25th of May, and it's also an area where there is a potential for more cooperation NATO-EU. You have many tools. NATO has many tools. None of us have all the tools in the toolkit, but together we really are a formidable force when NATO and the European Union works together. The other main issue at the summit, no, we don't call it a summit, the meeting of heads of state and government in May, is the transatlantic bond and burden sharing. And as you know, NATO made a decision in Wales in September 2014 to stop the cuts in defence spending, to gradually increase, and then to move towards spending 2% of GDP on defence within a decade. And the good news is that we have really turned the corner. Because after many, many years of decline, reduction in defence spending across Europe and Canada, in 2015, the first year after we made the pledge, For the first time, we saw a small increase. At least we didn't see a decrease. We saw a small increase in defense spending, total Europe and Canada. In 2016, the second year after we made the pledge, we saw actually a significant increase in defense spending across Europe and Canada. 3.8% in real terms, close to or around $10 billion, and that is a significant increase. So we are moving in the right direction. We still have a long way to go. The picture is still very mixed. Some allies are very close to 2%. Some allies have already reached 2%, while other allies still have a very long way to go. But we have started to move in the right direction, and I welcome that very much. Burden sharing for us is not only about spending. Burden sharing is also about capabilities. We need more modern capabilities to be able to provide strong and credible deterrence. The reason to be strong is not to provoke a conflict, but to prevent a conflict. And we need also contributions to NATO missions and operations, some of them working closely with the European Union. All of this will be addressed at the meeting of heads of state and government in May. Part of burden sharing or the transatlantic burden sharing is also NATO-EU cooperation. And therefore, I would like to once again underline that stronger European defense is something I welcome. Stronger European defense is good for the European Union, it's good for Europe, and it's good for NATO. As long as we make sure, or the European Union makes sure, that what the EU does is complementary to NATO, not competing with NATO. And that has been clearly committed from many, many European leaders, that strengthening European defense is about more defense spending, it's about more exercises, it's about developing capabilities, it's about more cooperation, but it's not about establishing a European army, it's not about establishing new command structures which are duplicating NATO command structures. And actually, therefore, I welcome what I see, because I see a real effort by NATO and the European Union to work together, not compete, and it would have been meaningless to have a competition between NATO and the European Union, because, as I said, more than 90% of the people living in the European Union live in a NATO country. So that would actually mean that we have to compete with ourselves, and that's a not very good thing to do. So my message to you is that NATO is adapting, NATO is responding to a more demanding, challenging, dangerous security environment. We do that by implementing the biggest adaptation of the alliance we have seen for many, many years. But we do that not least by stepping up our cooperation with the European Union, because we know that together we are stronger, together we are better able to respond to a more challenging international environment, which we share regardless of whether we are the European Union or NATO. Thank you so much.